Good evening and welcome to week 2 of Agile Evolved, the Big Picture, a series of webinars making up a short course that we're presenting from IT Masters for Charles Sturt University. As always tonight, we will allow, say, 3 or 4 minutes for everybody to come in. And while we're doing that, maybe you can do two things, one of which is to have a look at our poll, which is about the effectiveness of Scrum, because tonight is all about Scrum. It's Agile projects, but we're going to talk Scrum, and more Scrum. And the second is to have a chat in the chat session. Remember to set your chat to everyone so that we can all see what's going on. And yeah, I'll give you a couple of minutes of quiet and then we'll be right back with Brenton to start. Okay, there's still a few people coming in, but most of us are here. We'll leave the poll going for just a little minute more while I go through all of the housekeeping and introductions. So thanks again, everyone, for being here for week 2 of the second webinar of our Agile Evolved, the Big Picture course. It's a short course presented by IT Masters for and on behalf of Charles Sturt University. My name is Shane Murphy, and I'll be your MC for tonight and probably next week as well. Your mentor tonight is the irrepressible doyen of IT management and project management courses, short and postgraduate at IT Masters, Miss Brenton Burchmore, and I'll bring him on in a second. Wherever you're watching this, we hope that you are safe, well, content, and if you're in Sydney, dry. Apparently there's some weather going on in Sydney at the moment. The usual housekeeping stuff, all webinars will be held at the same time at 7:30. If you miss one or more, don't worry, we do make recordings. I already see people asking about that, and those will be available tomorrow. Yes, there is a recording from last week's available on our YouTube channel. If you go into the Moodle online, learn.itmasters.edu.au, my apologies, you can also click through to it from there. All the materials from last week are up and you'll find some of them here as well. Thank you to Lil. And while I'm saying that, Lil has just posted that. Lil is our mediator tonight. She will be keeping an eye on the chat and answering chat questions in there. So the sort of questions that we'd like you to put into the chat are things like, when are the webinars available? Do I have to pass the exam? Those sorts of things. But questions that you want Brenton to answer about the content of the course, please put them in the Q&A section and we will get to and answer as many of those as we possibly can. I think we had about 40 or 50 or 60 last week, and we got through about 25 to 30 something of them because a number of them were quite similar. So we will stop for questions probably 2 or 3 times during the course of the evening. Please feel free to chat directly to us, through the chat and amongst it yourselves. Lots of the people on the chat that we noticed last week, of course, are really experienced at this stuff, and we're all here to learn as well as teach. So we really welcome everybody's contributions to the discussions in the chat channel. So, we've got over 2,000 people enrolled in the course. As always, around about 10% of you turn up to the live lectures, and lots of the rest listen to it at various times along the way. When we first ran our first Agile course nearly 9 years ago, we've now had, I think, 28,000 people have enrolled in it. So it's time now to end the poll. So I will do that now, and to welcome Brenton Burchmore for tonight's mentoring and teaching. And Brenton, you've been here last week. Please welcome him aboard.
Thanks, Shane. Hello, everyone. Good evening, good morning, good afternoon, wherever you are. Thanks for tuning in. Welcome back to topic 2. Thank you to everyone for filling in the poll. Let me share the results for everyone to have a look at. Here we go. Quite a few people are saying that they don't really use Scrum, but if you look at the percentage that are saying, well, it's good or good enough, that's a little more than half. And the number of people that find it quite poor for them or excellent is somewhat similar. So I'm hoping that what we're going to cover tonight will have something to offer nearly everyone here, and there'll be some little nugget and some little thing of value that you'll be able to take with you. And for many of you, hopefully, there'll be tons of use. Now, as we talked about last week, I'm going to go through everything tonight to try to explain why and what's behind it all. Now, let me stop the poll and just remind everyone of the agenda, the syllabus, what we're going through tonight. This is the poll we've just done. So I'll move on from that. The course syllabus, here is where we're up to. This is the second week. You can see we've still got to talk about Agile delivery, which is how you use Agile for ongoing things. That'll be next week. And the final week is hybrid and large scale, etc. So this is where we're up to, Agile projects. And as I hinted, it's really going to be why Scrum, not just what and how, because there's plenty of resources we can tap into that will help us answer those questions. But I'm going to talk about why each of those elements actually exist. So for those of you who are doing Scrum, it might help broaden your insight as to why it happens that way and how you can refine or tailor or customize what you might be doing with Scrum. So what we're going to cover today, broken down into a few elements, we are going to go through the basics of Scrum. So I'm going to put the basic components up there, talk about why they exist and what function those components have in the Scrum method. I'm then going to talk about the roles, because these are quite interesting, unique facets of the way Scrum works. And it's quite different to the way we might be familiar with traditional projects. So we will go through those to some extent. Then we're going to talk about planning. And we'll kind of know what planning is and what it means, but how it works in Scrum is quite specific. If you think about last week, I talked about that one of the most important aspects of any Agile framework is the actual interaction side of the framework, the bits of the framework that help people come together. And planning is that key piece of Scrum where we all have to come together. And so the way that's designed and the reasons for it has some very specific things to it. And we're going to talk about meetings. There were a few interesting murmurs and comments and questions already last week about different kinds of meetings. And we will get a chance to talk about that. And there'll be some views shared, I'm sure, along the way today. But we're not just going to talk about daily stand-ups. We're going to talk about all of the important meetings that happen on a regular basis within Scrum. So I'm going to list out the core components. Each of them are going to be, we're going to go through them in more detail. So I'm not going to elaborate on them in this slide. But the things we're going to cover, we will talk about the sprints, what they are and how they work. We will talk about the roles. There are only 3 key roles. And they're all important, and they all have very specific things to do, which we'll delve into. Of course, we're going to talk about user stories, what they are, what they look like, and why they work the way they do. At this point, we're going to have a pause for questions and a poll at that point, just to give ourselves a chance to think about what we've been through. Then in the second half, we're going to talk about the product backlog, which is another word for scope in an Agile project. We're going to talk about release planning, and that means we're going not just to talk about sprint planning. We're going to talk about the larger scale of planning outside of that and why it happens the way it does. So this is going to be doing some of the things we talked about last week, where I'm dispelling some of the myths that say, well, Agile, Scrum, it isn't just free for all. It isn't just however we like it. It isn't like on a whim. We do plan things to happen in a certain way, even strategically. And of course, we'll talk about the meetings, what they are, what they do, why they happen. Now, a lot of what we're going to go through, I'm going to be talking about a standard or typical answer to what is often done within a Scrum environment. But a lot of these are variable. Organizations have the opportunity to push and pull at exactly what these numbers are and how they come together. But the actual framework is something that, whilst not entirely sacred, has some very important functions to fulfill. And that's the core thing I want to delve into with you all tonight. So let's start at the top and let's talk about the entire model that Scrum or any kind of Agile iterative delivery model works with. You start with a vision. You start with an idea. You start with something that says, well, we've kind of got enough of an idea of what we want. Then you have the cycle. The cycle starts with speculating. What could we do? How could we do this? What could we build here? What could we do with this? Let's build it. Let's try this thing. Let's build this feature. Let's do this functionality. Then let's adapt. Let's find out, is it right? Is it not right? Could we make it better? Could we do it differently? And that's a cycle. And these points in green, that's the iteration. And that cycle happens over and over and over again. So that's the iterative model. And at the very end, we close the project because stick a fork in it, it's done. But that's at the very end. The bit that happens all the way through is this cycle. Now, the wording here, I want to draw your attention to what this wording really means or might translate to in other forms of project management. Speculating, that's Agile's word for planning. Because often we're not dealing with specifics and knowns and certainties. We're dealing with what we believe or think or hope or are willing to try. And so to speculate and say, well, let's speculate on trying this, that's a kind of planning. And that's often the extent to which we can plan until we see the result. The explore, that's building. Exploration is the process of creating something. Because until we've created it, and until the customers looked at it and said, yeah, that's exactly what I want, or not, we don't know yet, not entirely. Or we don't have to know. And so we use the word explore because we're building something that we hope and believe might be worth it. And then the adapt phase, that's all about the feedback. How do we adapt? We adapt from what we learn, and we learn from every source of feedback we can get from everywhere. So this is the model that Scrum works in. And this is what Scrum puts a framework to and puts specifics to all of this. Building the vision is our starting point. It's where we come up with the very first ideas of what are we going to try and do here. It has some important components. There has to be some idea of an architecture. There might be major structural components. We're making decisions that usually we can make at the start by saying, well, is it an online or offline? Is it accessible remotely or not? Is it going to be built in this software code or that code? Where's our database going to live? Is it going to live on AWS or Azure or somewhere else? These are architectural questions that we'll have some idea from in the vision. The nature of the product itself needs to be worked out. What's it trying to do? What's its important elements? And there might be trade-offs that are already clear to the customer. Things like saying, well, we know that we could go this way. We could host here or we could host there. We're leaning this way because. So that's a trade-off we might have already figured out. And there might already be some trade-offs that have already been determined, and they belong in a trade-off matrix that says, well, this is where we're leaning to, but that doesn't mean we've ruled out something else. Then there's a level of, well, how certain are we? How clear are we with what we've put down? How certain that we know what we want or how we're going to do it or what it's going to look like? There may be some components that, well, we've got no idea how this is going to work or what this is going to look like, but we kind of know what we want as a result. Or we may be very clear and very specific. So we need to get a benchmark for that. And all of this gets put into something called a products requirement document. Now that document is the unifying force. This is the thing that guides all of the macro and micro decisions throughout the Scrum project. So if we're doing a sprint planning, or if we're doing a release plan, or if we're sitting there in a daily stand-up, or if we're not in a stand-up, we're sitting there after lunch and we're trying to make a decision on the one user story we're working on right now, our knowledge of this vision might help us at any point. The document, it's going to have the purpose as per the customer. What really matters to them? Why are they doing this? Yeah, they're doing it to compete, to keep up with their competitors, or to service their customers better, or something from a business strategic perspective. What's going to be worth the money they spend on this? What capability do they need? What's it got to really do? What's the problem statement that it's trying to solve, or the must-haves within its capability? And what are the other parameters? Is there something specific like, well, it has to work with our CRM system, or it has to work in this environment. It has to be accessible to certain people. It might also have a thing of, well, this is what it's not. Yes, it needs to work with our CRM system, but we don't want to replace any functionality that exists within the CRM system. So don't go replicating that stuff. So this is our opportunity to say, here's what it's not going to be. Here's what it won't do, shouldn't do. Stay away from these objectives. This is for clarity and certainty. This is to stop us exploring in a direction that isn't really going to yield what's important. Then what are the assumptions we've made? There might be assumptions about how much technical. Yeah, we could do it this way. We could do it that way. We might have a bunch of assumptions that are unproven as yet. Record those. And lastly, are there any timeline requirements? If we're building something that's going to be used during the Olympics, we're not going to be able to ring the IOC and say, hey, can you push that back a week? We're not quite ready. Some things are going to have hard deadlines. Some things are not. Sometimes the cost is a hard deadline. There might be certain milestones where we need certain things running by Christmas and other things running after that. Whatever, that's where it gets put. So now we've got a vision. We've got a document. We've got a starting point. We're now trying to figure out what's a sprint. Now, for those that are curious, why is it called Scrum and why are they called sprints? This is directly borrowed from rugby. Rugby has the scrum where the forwards get together, all grab each other and get into a scrum and coordinate together to move the ball back into their possession. That's the scrum. That's the intense moment of focus on the ball to get control of it. And then the sprint is when the back line gets hold of the ball and dashes forward, passing it between them. That's the sprint. Sprint is the forward movement. The scrum is the wrangling of control about getting back the ball. Now, a sprint needs to have certain attributes. We touched on a little bit of this last week. It needs to be short enough. Why does it need to be short enough? It needs to be short enough to make sure that we are able to get feedback from the customer short enough, soon enough for us to act upon it. And one of the biggest reasons for this is simply the human memory. Because cognitive overload and cognitive decay means that when you worked on something a week and a half ago, it's a lot easier to sit down with a customer and think back, what did I do then? How did I do that? What was hard? What was easy? Customer gives me feedback. Oh, yeah, okay. I can take their feedback on board and I can evolve that and give them exactly what they want next time. But if that work that I did was 5.5 weeks ago, my chances of remembering all of that, much smaller. My quality of my memory and my ability to qualitatively absorb and fully utilize the feedback from the customer is diminished, perhaps greatly so. So this is the main reason why we're shortening the sprints, but they can't be too short. They have to be long enough for us to be able to consistently produce work outputs that are big enough and functional enough that the customer can recognize what it's going to do and see that and evaluate that and say, yeah, that's going to work that's working how I think. But if it's only a half done and it's not working and you're saying to the customer, okay, look, it's not quite really there, but imagine if it was like this, right? Is that what you want? That's not what this was. That's not how this works. We absolutely need the high quality feedback that comes from the customer's ability to really see it as a complete piece of functionality. And that's why the sprint needs to be long enough for the team to be regularly producing completed user stories. So there's your balancing act. And those are the reasons for the balance. But it's also going to be the same rhythm. And that is, again, to do with the way the human mind engages with patterns of behavior. Our ability to predict what's going to happen 2 weeks from now, 3 weeks from now. If we're on a 3-week sprint, that means that we know in 3 weeks' time, we're going to have to clear our diary and make ourselves available for the immutable planning meeting that's going to happen at the end of the sprint. We can't be off on holidays, away, not feeling like it, busy doing something else. And it has to be the same rhythm so we can predict and plan. Some of these meetings are must-attend meetings. And you need to know exactly when there are in a predictable fashion. The customer also needs to have the predictability to be able to say, okay, well, there's going to be a review meeting. You're going to be showing me stuff. I need to have people there to see it and to be able to evaluate it. That's another reason why it needs to be long enough. The sprint needs to be long enough so that we're not wasting the customer's time. We're saying, well, we kind of wanted to give you 8 features, but we've only got 2 done. Customer's going to be thinking, well, it's not really worth my time. Maybe I should come back next week. Well, it needs to be the same rhythm. They need to be uninterrupted. When the team sits down to do their sprint, they need the freedom. And again, it's all about cognitive load. They need the freedom to be able to say, I know I can focus on my work for the next 3 weeks or 2 or 4 or whatever it is. And that gives them the ability to say, okay, in that period of time, I'm responsible for what I've taken on. I now can reliably plan that I am not going to be interrupted with meetings or radical changes to what I'm doing within that somewhat sacred window of activity. You get momentum. You get cognitive momentum. You get the ability to work on something 2, 3, 4, 5 days in a row, knowing that what you're keeping in your head during those few days is entirely relevant to what you're going to be doing tomorrow, reliably, confirmed, locked in, not wasted. But a degree of flexibility, because there are going to be occasions where somebody has a user story that's just I'm possibly incomplicated. We can't figure this out. We thought we could get this done. Estimates were wrong, missing information from the customer. Sometimes you get a user story that you say, look, just push that back to the next sprint. We're just not going to get it done in time. There's no point half doing it. Or maybe there's no point half doing it. So we're not going to even go any further. Let's pull something else in from the product backlog into the current sprint, and we'll do that instead. Now, that's not what you want to be doing often, but it's not sacred. It's got enough flexibility to be able to do that when that's a sensible thing to do. So that's a sprint. It's the rhythm of the project. So that is defining how we go about things on a pattern basis. But who does what? Who handles what? Who does what? Well, let's have a look at the 3 Scrum roles. And there are only 3. And then we're going to talk about the 4th one. But you're all going to be thinking, wait, hang on, there's one missing here. We'll get to that. First is the Scrum Master. Now, what they do officially is they are responsible for the way in which things happen. They are literally accountable for the methodology, or our version of that, our approach, how we do things. So how we Scrum, or how we kind of Scrum, our version of whatever it is we do, the how. And that how efficiency on a daily basis, that's the Scrum Master, making sure that everything happens, harmony is there, everyone's motivated, everyone knows what they're doing. And any obstacles come up, the Scrum Master's role is to help make sure that that obstacle gets resolved, not by stepping in and fixing everything themselves, but maybe by triggering the interactions necessary. Where a teammate says, well, I'm stuck with this, but how about we get this other team person involved? Or maybe we need to get the customer involved. Let's talk to this person. What do we need to do to solve this? The Scrum Master is also looking to do this, improve this on an ongoing basis. So every sprint, there's a retrospective, which we're going to talk about in more detail a little later, which gives insights where the Scrum Master is responsible for saying to people, hey, you should do this differently. We could try to do this differently. This could work better. So the Scrum Master is all about the method. The product owner, quite simply, is the customer's representative. They represent value. They represent the customer's perspective. They are also responsible for the customer's engagement, getting the customer on the same page, getting the customer's people involved, getting them to turn up for the review meetings, getting their highly valuable, essential input fed into the process. Product owner is there to make that happen. And if any of the team member needs something from the customer, the product owner is there to make that happen. But the product owner also understands the customer's vision most thoroughly, as well as the customer does, hopefully. So the product owner is there to be that voice within the Scrum environment to say, well, this is what matters to the customer. This is what's important. This is their priorities. So this is why the product owner has this role of managing the backlog. I'm saying, well, okay, this sprint right now, that's sacred. Everyone in the sprint can forget about everything else. We're only worried about what's in this sprint. Not so the product owner. The product owner is thinking about what's to come. Because at the end of this sprint, there's going to be a need to say, what do we do next? What's next sprint? That's where the product owner will step forward and say, well, this would be making the customer very happy if we got this stuff done. Not as an absolute decision, but as the customer's voice. Then there's the team. The hardworking folks who build stuff and produce things. They're also the ones who are deciding sprint by sprint what they will actually take on. It's a negotiated function. They're not unilaterally deciding. There's still the product owner saying, well, we've got a release plan and we need to do this. And we will talk about that a little more later. But when the user stories are there in the sprint and say, well, here's all the things we've got to do. then the team members are saying, well, I'll do this, I'll do this, I'll do this, you do that, we do this, individually and collectively responsible for everything they get taken on during the sprint. And they get self-organized during the sprint. Fred might talk to Mary about this problem or that problem, or Mary goes and talks to Fred. And how that happens, those interactions within the sprint, leave it up to the team to manage that, with the Scrum Master there to make sure that it all stays on track and the people don't get too distracted or barking up the wrong tree or going down the wrong river. Oh, some other analogy. Now, the role that's missing, and I call it missing because we're used to this role. We're used to this label. We're used to this identifier. Who is the project manager? Now, I'm going to give you two answers to this question. First is the official answer within Scrum is that there isn't one. Or more to the point, there doesn't need to be what you might consider the project manager. Because in a traditional plan-based methodology, the project manager, they're responsible for the plan. And the plan's done, like the entirety of the plan. So you really just need a project manager to then have everything manifest thereafter. That's not the case in Scrum. Now, I would describe the project manager in this case as the person where there is a commercial responsibility, you might have a role of project manager that is commercially responsible for the success of the project. If you're billing for this, if you're charging your customer for what you're doing, then you're a company who needs to stay profitable. And you may have a role that says, I'm responsible for making sure that every project we do is profitable and that we stay in business. Now, quite often, you'll have that role actually shared between the product owner and the Scrum Master, because those two roles are often in tension, good tension, not conflict, but tension, because they have competing requirements. Scrum Master's looking after the team and the harmony, product owner's looking after the results, the value of the customer. And between the two of them, they are fulfilling the roles of project manager, but there doesn't actually need to be one. But if you have a project manager who has this commercial accountability and they have one other role, be careful. That can be complicated, especially in small organizations where you don't have lots of people. One of the things you absolutely cannot do, should not ever do, is have the product owner and the Scrum Master the same person. That should never be the case. Can you have the Scrum Master, one member of the team, also producing stuff? Potentially in small organizations, I've seen that happen. I've seen it work and I've seen it struggle. But if you're not big enough and the project isn't big enough to afford its very own purely dedicated Scrum Master, then maybe they need to do something else, but not also product owner. I've seen situations where the product owner is the salesperson who's busy out there selling or trying to sell new projects to new customers, but they're still caretaking this one as a product owner and have that role. That could work. Let's talk about our third point before we break for questions and a poll. User stories. Now, this is a fundamental ingredient in what happens in Scrum. So we need to get a head around it and why it is the way it is. They need to be descriptive, but they are described from the user's point of view. As where the user says, well, I want to be able to click a button and it does this. And I want to be able to see this and this on my screen. Now, they're not coders. They're not technical people. They're not necessarily able to describe anything from a technical point of view, and they don't need to. First pass, first draft, the user story just needs to capture as much as possible the functionality that the user expects, wants, hopes, desires. But user stories get refined. There is still a process of validation, verification, refinement, where user stories are looked at by development team members to say, well, what does this mean? What does this translate to? And yes, there is a translation that occurs between a purely practical functional description of something happening and the technical specific function of what that looks like from a coder's point of view. It is not the user's point of view to breach that gap and jump that chasm. It is the development team's point of view, responsibility with the product owner's help. So the product owner is meant to facilitate this refinement process. But it is far easier for a developer to get their head around what a user is expecting to see on the screen than it is for a user to get their head around how to write that in C++. And so there's only one way that responsibility can go. And so the refinement does inevitably fall to the people who are going to be building it. And that's why there does need to be a refinement process, because part of that refinement process is measuring how hard we think it's going to be, how much time it's going to take, how many story points as a unit of measure each story will take. But they're not built to specification. We're not refining it to the point of view where we're saying, well, here's the technical specs here. Here's what we're going to do. It's something to be explored. Remember, creation is exploration. We're looking for, well, we think we know what they want, and I'm going to do a version of that that makes the most sense to me with what I know that they're looking for, and then I'm going to show it to them at the end of the sprint, and they're going to tell me once they see it whether that's the value they're looking for or not. And if it's not, then that sprint's going to go back into the product backlog and, well, probably into the very next sprint because of cognitive momentum. We want to be able to keep working on it. You do get a thing called technical stories. Now, for those of you thinking, well, hang on, that's great, but any technical thing like a piece of software is going to have stuff under the hood, right? Things that the users have got no idea about. Look, before you can do this cute graphical UI thing, you need some coding underneath, right? And no user is going to tell you that because of what I just said, right? They're not going to get their head around that. We have to create that as a team that says, well, in order for this to happen, we're going to do these underpinning things, and they're called technical stories. And they still get paid for. They still exist in the product backlog. And it's part of the product owner's job to say to the customer, here's all the underpinning stuff. Don't forget, you've got to pay for all that as well. This is work we're going to have to do. This leads to the measure of effort, story points. And when you look at what we're going to go through in a moment when we talk about product backlog and burn down, it's going to be based on story points. Because some features, some user stories, they're an hour or two's work. They're simple little things, but some take days. They're really big pieces of work. And there's no rule that says exactly how big they need to be, other than to say that we really want to get it done within one sprint. And how big? That's going to be based on the user, the story points. Then that's how we use to calculate and estimate how much it's going to take. But they're just estimations, right? We won't know until partway through or at the end of the sprint whether that estimate was right or not. And that's one of the reasons why sprints are flexible. So, pausing. I'm going to ask a question, put a poll up whilst we have a look at some of the questions that are coming in, and some of you might think of more questions. Here is a poll to consider. In your opinion, what would be the toughest part of working with user stories in Scrum? And we're going to see that poll in a moment. Here we go.
So yeah, the poll's up, and while people are filling in the poll, we should have a chat about some of these questions. There are already 17 questions up.
Is this a choose any? Did we put this as a choose any or choose one?
It doesn't. I don't know. It doesn't say.
Okay, never mind. Everyone figure that out. Questions? Yeah, we've got a few.
Can a Scrum Master play the role of a product owner too? Although I see that Saphir, I think it is, said maybe not.
Yeah, my rule is absolutely not. And I do mean absolutely not. They are roles that are meant to be in tension. And it would be a recipe for disaster if somebody wore two hats that were meant to be in partial conflict with each other. And I'm not saying that the conflict is meant to be problematic, but they're representing the two different sides of the equation. The Scrum Master represents the team, the product owner represents the customer. And having one person representing both means they're effectively a project manager. They're making all the decisions, and you're not really agile anymore because you've ruled out the team.
It's all in the title, isn't it? In Agile, who controls the budget? That's usually the responsibility of a project manager in a traditional project. So
in an Agile project, it's the customer controls the budget because they're the ones that are making the ROI decision. And it's the product owner who inherits that understanding and is aware of whatever flexibility may exist, because sometimes it's absolute hard and fast. Here's what we've allocated, not a cent more. Or here's a budget. I hope we can get it for that. Let's see how we go. And it's the product owner's job to understand those nuances from the customer's perspective and to be able to bring that discussion in. Because when things happen, like we discover that the story point estimates that we've done were way under, and this work's going to take a ton longer than we thought. It's just how it is. We don't have to do that for free. The product owner goes back to the customer and says, see these user stories that we thought was going to be 1 week's work. Guess what? It's 2 weeks' work. Do you still want them? And if the answer is yes, we still want them. Well, do you still want your deadline? Is your budget fixed? Yes, the budget's still fixed. Well, what else do you want to cut out then? What are you prepared to cut out if you still want this that's now going to take longer? Or the customer comes along and says, I've got this great idea for this extra stuff I want you to do. Well, same questions. Product owner is responsible for resolving that. So the product owner manages the budget questions and gets them resolved.
Great. A couple of questions about technical stories. I've been asked, are they the same as technical debt? And secondly, are they the same as technical specifications?
Neither, but they're related to both. So technical debt is when software gets more and more complicated and you build up complexity, and especially if there's a lack of recency, so there's a lack of clear memory and there's a lack of documentation, and you're going back to do something that's long ago, then the technical debt that exists is the things that make it harder for you to get straight back in and do that. A lack of knowing or remembering or reading about it. Now, technical stories are simply the pieces of work that must be done. Before you can put data into a database, you need to build a database. And that's an example of a user story. A user isn't going to tell you, write a story that says, oh, I want a database. No, they're going to say, I want my data on my screen to look like this. So the technical story would be to build a database with a structure behind it. Technical specifications lead to technical stories because someone in the dev team says, okay, they want this data appearing and maybe it's an API. We're going to pull that from their CRM system. So I'm going to have a technical story that says build the API in order to do that. And that might lead to something quite technical as a specification that's necessary for the API to work. But the actual story and the points needed for it to exist, that was decided by the dev team. And that's a technical story.
Great. Couple of questions about BAs. Where do they fit into Scrum?
Now, BAs, one of the first places they live is in helping the customer create their product requirements document. So they live in the problem statement. And that's where things get nailed down first. And so, yes, the BA still has the role of, let's talk to everyone, find out what we really need. Let's gather all of the requirements. But they're not finishing that with a set of specifications. They're finishing that with a vision document and a product requirements document. So they're finishing their work with a lot more vagaries because there's a lot more unknowns and uncertainties, but they're still gathering whatever they can gather up until that point. And they may still have a role within the customer to bring a degree of technical expertise back into the customer's headspace. So there is a role for BAs in some large projects that is the opposite of the product owner. The product owner lives inside the Scrum environment and represents the customer. And the BA can live inside the customer environment and represent development.
Okay, a couple of questions about project managers or project directors. Somebody has said, is the product owner and a product manager two different roles? And another person said, so would an account exec be a product manager or director?
So I've seen situations where account executives are product owners because they're responsible for the commercial success of the customer relationship. They want the customer to spend big, spend more, spend again. And they are often a suitable role as a product owner, but they need to have enough knowledge to be able to work in the environment. They can't just have an account management sales perspective. They need that extra level of training as well, but they can function in that way. So they can certainly do that. But a product owner might be someone who, a product manager might be someone who's responsible for a product over its life cycle. but the Scrum portion might only exist during its creation.
Great. While we're on that, Jason was more commenting than asking, but to say a product owner then would be the senior user in Prince 2, just to compare.
Yes, there's a correlation with that. I would agree with that.
Yep. Do you fund CapEx in an Agile project during the speculate phase? How, when we don't know how long the project will go for, etc.?
So that comes under the architecture questions. When you look at the vision statement, when you have things that are going to require capital expenditure, you're going to be deciding on if you need hardware, you need equipment, you need licenses, there's stuff you've got to buy up front. Those are architecture questions. There is something else that is called Sprint Zero, which we're yet to talk about, that is a mechanism that we use to figure out some unknowns that are underpinning infrastructure questions that might be part of the CapEx question mark.
Right. This one's interesting. How's a backlog refinement handled when the team manager is too busy to do a good job of product ownership? Can or should product ownership then be delegated into the team? It says asking for a friend.
I'm going to ask to postpone that question. And can you remind me, Shane, because we're about to talk about product backlogs and release planning, and we may have an answer to that question then.
Great.
But if I don't, can you circle me back to it?
Yep. Somebody's asked, how does product development come in the first iteration?
Well, I think we should also put that into the Sprint Zero discussion that we're about to have, because I think that's another good question that we talk about product development. I mean, the whole thing is development from start to finish, because it's perceived that there's going to be some unknowns and uncertainties, but you get the highest amount of uncertainty at the very start. And one of the goals of the first sprint or few sprints is quite specifically to aggressively attack the most important unknowns and the dependency unknowns and tackle them first and foremost in the first sprint or three.
While we're just talking about sprints, we'll finish with 3 sprint questions and try and answer them all together. Does the duration of a sprint need to be universal across the project, or can different teams have different sprints? And are you saying there should only be 1 sprint or 1 sprint per function? And what's the maximum number of sprint teams for a developer to be a member of? I'm assuming that means and still be saying.
Okay, so these are scaling questions, and some of this we'll explain more in week 4, but the short answer now is most generally people are only in 1 sprint team at a time, but there might be teams of teams, and there might be teams that are like a team is working on this and a team is working on that, but they're going to work together on the same pace. And usually, no matter how big and how many teams you have, everyone's working on the same rhythm, on the same pattern. Because whilst you have, let's say, for argument's sake, say 2-week sprints, and this team gets together every 2 weeks and this team gets together every 2 weeks. And the reason you do that, because every 2 weeks, there's going to be crossover synergy that they're going to need to react to. And remember, we said that a sprint is a sacred period of workflow. What you never want to have is to suddenly discover halfway through your sprint that some other team has made a whole bunch of changes and decisions that are going to upset what you're doing, and you've got to react to that, and suddenly your sprint is being ruined. And so that's why you must have a rhythm, and that's why typically it's always the same time period.
Great. I'm going to end the poll now. I'm tempted to ask one last question, even though I know we're running short on time, because I think this is interesting. I have this issue. I would love your point of view. My team tell me that they don't know the tasks that are required until during the sprint. So they identify them during the sprint, then add to the sprint. This messes with my sprint plan and, of course, the organizational reporting. I've asked them for a high-level plan so that we can so that we can estimate what can be done during the sprint. I'm then told that I don't understand the technical nature of the work. We should break this work into features and user stories, but the team is very resistant to working in a structured way. Any suggestions?
Wow. Okay. That's complicated. It does seem to me, I'm rereading it just to put it all back in my head. So the team, I'm assuming they mean the development team, don't know the tasks that are required until during the sprint. So That would suggest there's a problem with estimating. That would also suggest there's been a weakness in the refinement process of understanding the user stories, where they may not have enough or may not have done enough to fully know enough to measure and estimate how many story points a story is going to take. And if they're falling short on that estimate, like if they don't even know what it is, then they're not going to be able to estimate story points. And that suggests that it's the refinement step that is being undercooked there. And if anyone is in that situation is saying or making the case that someone else doesn't know the technical requirements, then it is absolutely their responsibility to share their understanding with whoever else needs to help them. They're the ones that need to reach across the aisle. It is not the non-technical people that need to suddenly learn how to code to meet them in the middle. And that's an unfortunate truth. And so it sounds like there's those two things are being maybe underperformed in that environment.
Yes, there was a follow-up that said they don't want to estimate stories, they just want to work. Coders.
Yeah. That's not scrumming.
Yes. Okay, we've still got piles of questions, but I think we need to move on.
Let's share the poll, because I want to talk about the fact that 40% of you have said that users keep changing their stories. Now, usually in Scrum, we say that's a great thing, because usually the idea is the users are learning what they really wanted all along. And part of the problem is there should be a degree of acceptance on both sides of the fence. That is to say that users can say at the end of the sprint, oh, that's what it looks like. Oh, no, that's not what I want. I want it like this. And then the development should be able to say, absolutely, we can do it that way. And you're still going to pay for everything I did in the last 2 weeks, which is not what the dev team needs to have. But as long as the customer understands that they can be as vague as they want in the beginning, and they can take as long as they want to narrow it down, and they pay for every hour of your time. And as the development team, if you're spending work and reworking and redoing work because the customer doesn't know what's going on inside their own heads, and they're paying for that, that can be a little unfulfilling. But at the end of the day, that might need to be the process you take the customer through to get them to the value that they're happy with at the end. That is sometimes what some projects actually require of us, despite how unfulfilling it might sometimes be. Let's move into the second half of what we're talking about. It will be a little quicker than the first half because it's slightly easier ideas. The product backlog is quite simply all the work we haven't done yet. And when I say the work, I mean all of the stories, be they user stories or technical stories. It's just the long list, right? So that's what the product backlog is. How it works is a little bit more interesting. So once features and user stories are signed off by the customer, they're done. But until then, if they're still in a rework stage, if they're going to get more work done on them next or at a subsequent sprint, they're still in the product backlog. It's the product owner that manages the backlog, because it's the product owner that is meant to be able to say, okay, here's what needs to be done, should be done, customer wants to be done in the next couple of sprints. Here's a bunch of stuff that they want to put together. And that's what we're going to talk about, why that happens in a moment. But that's essentially the product owner's job. And it gets allocated to sprints according to the release plan. And this is part of the gold. The release plan is what makes Scrum Scrum and not crazy chaotic. The release plan is the thing that a lot of Scrum teams underutilize, don't respect, don't work with well enough, and it gets them into a great deal of trouble. When you look at the work to be done through the product backlog, we use words like velocity and burn down. These are actually fairly straightforward. Velocity is the rate at which story points are completed in the sprint. It's simply, okay, it's manpower, it's workload, it's operating hours, it's how much stuff do we get done. We produced X amount of story points worth of stuff. That's our velocity. So if we spend more time researching, figuring out, looking things up, Googling, getting trained, getting experience on stuff, well, that's not going to give us the same velocity, but that happens at the beginning. Velocity is usually lower in the beginning and it ramps up. Burn down is a word used to describe how we get through the backlog. We burn down the backlog. Sounds exciting, but no, we don't actually set anything on fire. It's simply stuff gets done through the sprint by sprint. Here's a very simple look at what that might look like in a graph. Here you've got the blue line is the original intended estimated burn down. And then you can see that we're a little bit behind schedule early on, right? Because you can see down here, our velocity was a little bit low. We weren't actually doing many points in the first few weeks, figuring stuff out, struggling, lots of to and fro. But then we started to pick up a little bit. We get our velocity up again, and we managed to get our behind schedule to be ahead of schedule. Now, this is called a simple burn down chart because it doesn't allow for changes. This doesn't show changes in the backlog or changes in scope or changes in requirements. It doesn't show changes because there's two changes that can happen. One is that the customer may add or remove things from the product backlog. Oh, we don't need that anymore. Or, hey, we've got this new thing we want to add. Or because this is points, not user stories, you may have situations where estimates are out. They're wrong. And the team will be saying, oh, this particular thing is 20 points and this one's 30. And actually that one was 40 and this one was 10. And so it doesn't always even out, but those variances aren't shown. There's more complex and different graphs that we won't go into here, but this is a simple way that you can show, at least to describe what these words mean. Now, there's risk in this. Before we get into planning, I want to talk about how we manage risk. There's one fundamental concept, and I alluded to it a moment ago. With some of the questions, I talked about the fact that in Scrum projects, you want to nail down and chase the unknowns early. What that looks like is from a concept, you do the expansion of the concept first. So you look at all the things across the entire project that have unknowns, and you say, well, what do we need to learn about this and learn about this and learn about this? What you don't want to do is say, I've got this bit figured out. I'm going to spend the next 4 sprints producing that. And then I'm going to take my first look at this other thing and, oh my goodness, there's no way this is going to fly. Wow, wish I'd known that 3 sprints ago. And so fundamentally, conceptually, we have this expansion of investigation, and then we have extension in depth as we go deeper and deeper and deeper into the things that we've at least somewhat figured out. And this is one of the reasons why the first few sprints often have a low velocity. There's lots of trial and error. There's what are we going to do here? What are we going to do there? How are we going to do this? We might not be doing that for another 10 sprints later, but we did have to answer a question because we had to buy something. We had to lock in some dependency. This is one of the ways in which Agile deals with risk. Because the risks of the great uncertainties, some of them need to be narrowed in the extent of risk that they bring. Let's talk about release planning because, as I mentioned before, this is the gold. This is the interesting and exciting. You get Sprint Zero. One of the interesting things about Sprint Zero is that it has no specific requirements for deliverables to the customer. It is just there to deliver all internal, explore, trial and error, figure out the technical answers. You're not going to be showing anything to the customer at the end of Sprint Zero. And it's the one time where you can break the rule on how long is a sprint. You can have, okay, we might go with 2-week sprints, but your Sprint Zero is going to be 3 weeks because that's how long we need. It aligns capability. Release planning is not just what are we going to do this sprint. Release planning is what are we going to do in these 3 sprints, and then these 3 sprints, and then these 3 sprints. Because what this does, when you put a whole bunch of features together and they work together, they deliver capability. You put a bunch of features together, say, well, you can click this and it do this. You click this and it do that. You click this and it does that. You put all that together and there's your sales reporting functionality. Now I've got something that I can put a price tag on and say, well, that's now going to help my team do things. That's capability that I'm going to pay for. That's billable value. And the product owner is there saying, okay, we need to bundle together a select group of features and user stories that can actually work together, that can be functionally usable or visible or identifiable, or a payment milestone that we can say to the customer, we built this module. But if we're doing 10% of this and 10% of that and 10% of something else, we're never going to get to the point until the very end. And that may not be commercially viable for us. or for the customer. It's the product owner's job to make sure that long-scale management of that product backlog makes sense in terms of billable milestones, or makes sense in terms of capability. And it's what leads to the planning of sprints. It puts that requirement that says, okay, yeah, team, you kind of look at this backlog and yeah, you have a bit of say as to which things you want to pull into the next sprint, but you don't have absolute say. You still got to listen to the product owner that says, we can't just leave these things for 6 months later. They've got to get done before this phase in the release schedule. And you can call, some people call it, stories, epics, and larger labels for things, waves, doesn't matter what you call it. It's strategic planning of the grouping of the work for strategic reasons. And it's absolutely a factor. And if you haven't got enough knowledge of in which capability does a user story belong, then you haven't explored that user story well enough to know. And once you know that and you can put it in, then you've got this strategic framework. That's release planning, because a release is multiple sprints put together with a release, and says we're going to now release this because it all works together as functionality. So how does that feed into sprint planning? What is sprint planning? It's something that happens in a single day, and the entire Scrum team needs to be there. Yes, the Scrum Master absolutely runs that meeting. The product owner is there. They have a role to say, well, as I just mentioned, strategically, this is what the customer is hoping to see in 3 months' time. We need to keep sight of that. But it's a one-day event that plans what happens in the sprint. All the stakeholders must be there. Product owner provides the guidance from the customer's perspective, and we're keeping in mind the things we learned from the last sprint. What did we discover? What did we think about? What worked? What didn't work? That's the Scrum Master's role primarily, to keep track of that. And the team members, looking at the list of too many things, and usually it's something like 50 to 100% more than what you would normally put in a sprint. That's the short list of what might go in. That's come from strategic imperatives. Then the team is saying, all right, this, and this. I've been working on similar things, so this will be easier to do now because my head's there, or this is happening, or this will have to wait, and they figure out individually and collectively. So individually, what am I taking on over the next sprint? And then collectively, what's everyone taking on? And can we all manage that? And the reality check comes from the Scrum Master. But once they agree to the workload, they agree to the workload. Then the sprint happens and nobody touches any planning unless an emergency happens. And then that's the Scrum Master to say, okay, as an emergency, boot this problematic user story off, or pull another one in because, wow, you're super efficient. You got everything done. You got 3 days spare. Find something else to do from the backlog. But we plan with the team, not for the team. Team is joining these decisions. In between the sprints, there are 2 other key meetings that happen. Now, sprint planning, I've just talked about it ahead of this, but chronologically, sprint planning happens after these 2 meetings. There's the sprint review. And I've talked about this last week, talked about it again tonight. This is the part where you get the customer's feedback. You've got to make sure that the project owner makes sure that the customer's appropriate stakeholders are there. The ones that have the ability to measure, evaluate, and review what's being done in that last sprint. You get that feedback from the customer, and they have to turn up. So you have to make it worth their while. And they have to commit to this. They can't say, oh, look, can we put that off till next Tuesday? No. We cannot simply say, let's just extend our sprint by another 4 days because the customer's playing golf. Can't happen. Lock it in up front. You're going to work with us on an agile basis. You or your representatives are going to be available every fortnight, every 3 weeks. It's another reason why the sprint is patterned. And then there's the retrospective, which is the internal review. The review is the workload that gets put out there. What did we do, customer? What did you think of it? And then there's the internal with each other. How did we really go about this? What made it hard? What went well? What did we learn? What should we do differently? Decisions, important decisions like we need better coffee during the stand-up meetings, right? Because we've got to get through them. Stuff like that. Issues between product owner and Scrum Master, etc., all get resolved in the retrospective. It's just the internal review of how well we did things. These two typically occur together. It doesn't really matter what order they're in. That's probably going to be determined by when you get the customers available. But they both happen, and they both happen before planning, because planning the next sprint leverages everything we've learned from these two meetings. And they are sacred. They must happen, and they must happen. I mean, everyone is involved in the retrospective, but you might have representatives involved in the review. That can happen. You might not have the whole team involved in it, but you might. Everyone built something, and everyone needs that feedback, especially if the customer says, no, that's not right. Let's talk about the exciting bit, the daily stand-ups. That's worth a bit of a chat. Short meetings to look for exceptions. Now, I'm going to try and lay out once again why things happen the way they do. But if there's one thing that's most variable amongst organizations that embrace Scrum, one of the most different things is the way in which they do their daily stand-ups. And there's some interesting reasons for that. So I'm not gonna try and trigger a debate about the best way to run a daily stand-up. But what I want to talk about is the reasons why they exist. And here they are all at once. Yes, it's run by the Scrum Master, and it is the Scrum Master's duty to make the daily stand-up meeting perform effectively for everyone's benefit, not for their own benefit, and definitely not for the product owner, who may or may not even be there. And if they are there, they're just an attendee. They're not a participant. They're there in case someone calls their name, but they don't usually have anything to say unless they get asked something, usually. They're welcome, but they're not pivotal. Scrum Master absolutely has to be there, team member or there. It's meant to be 15 to 30 minutes. How do you keep it that short? Because it's only there for the exceptions, not for everything. It's meant to find obstacles that individual team members have and what collaborative fixes might be necessary, useful, or appropriate. If it's a one-to-one thing where a person, I'm struggling with this, can the team help you? No, the team can't help you. Then it's not an issue to be discussed in the stand-up meeting. It might happen immediately after. Now, when I did daily stand-ups, it was back in the day when we all stood in the office, right? Pre-remote work. And we had 3 areas marked out on the floor. Not actually marked out, but 3 places that people would stand. Group A would stand on my left, and those are the people that had no problems, nothing to say. They had a full day's work ahead of them, and they were just ready to get on with it. And they'd stand over there, usually silently. Group B would stand in the middle. They're the ones that had something to say, ask, check, that might involve some other members of the team or that other members of the team might need to know about. So they had something to say, and the group was their ears. And then on the right, my right, were the people that had real problems, something that needed to be solved. But it wasn't going to get solved inside the stand-up. So what we do is we'd start with Group B, right? What did you want to share? What did you want to learn? Sharing, learning, okay, people nodding, yep, okay. There might be a bit of, oh yeah, I can help you with that later. Let's talk about that at lunchtime, right? Done. Then the people with the real problems, they just say, okay, my problem is this, and then my problem is this, and my problem is this. Can anyone else want to join the meeting that's going to happen afterwards? Yes, no. All right, done, dismissed. Get on with your day. And then you might have a couple of then one-to-one small groups. You talk with one of your problem holders, and 1 or 2 other people from the team that you brought in or that they brought in or that they've offered to come in and say, I might have an answer for that. And you solve that then and there. And then everyone gets on with their day. But you definitely don't try and solve all the problems. It's for synergies. It's for finding the opportunities for synergy that's going to happen after the meeting. It's not for solving it during the meeting. So here's a quick refresh of all the 4 meetings. We talked about sprint planning, the one-day meeting to agree on the work that's being done. We talked about sprint reviews, which is customer feedback on the deliverable work. We talked about retrospectives, which is our inward analysis of how well we're performing, and the daily stand-ups, which is a daily search for collaboration needs or opportunities, and then get on with it. We have a final poll and a last opportunity for questions. Shane, are we ready to kick off our final poll? I'm actually gonna go back to, oh no, they're there, right? Yeah. It's got there. Now, this poll is the 6 components that we just talked about tonight of Scrum. And the question is, which of these would be the hardest in your organization to do well? How are we going with other questions, Shane?
I think the hardest thing is to choose which questions. Okay, so there are so many questions, which is fantastic. Jamie asks, do high-performing teams need daily stand-ups? Are they mandatory?
I think the second part of the answer is it depends on what they're working on. And I have seen successful situations where high-performing teams that are working on user stories that occur over multiple days. And if the team is well self-organized, right, you have situations where team members are already interacting with each other. They're already communicating. They're running a shared comms channel and they're sharing their ideas throughout the day, and that's working smoothly. If a Scrum Master sees that happening, then you could go for alternate days. But the point behind a methodology is that they're kind of built not to make those assumptions. They're built not to assume that you've got a great team and that everyone's on top of things. The methodology is there for when it's not, when the team isn't, or they're missing something, or they're hiding something, or they're not thinking about something, and it needs to be found by someone else. And so abandoning stand-ups altogether would, I think, be a very risky idea. But you can have breaks at times. You can have a poll or vote. You can have a private vote. I have seen that done. I used it once, where do we want to have a daily stand-up today vote? And if one person says yes, we're having it. But it's a silent vote, so no one gets shamed. I've seen that work. And yeah, there have been a few times when that has resulted in no meeting. So you can tailor it, but sorry, go ahead, Shane.
I was going to say, if you're running the meeting well, you'd be able to tell if there's a need for it to really go ahead or not.
Yeah, you get a feel for that, and you can tailor your own solution to what works for you. But be wary when you take away the support structure of the framework.
Yeah. A couple of questions on product backlog. Should it be ready before you start? And is it a sprint 0 activity, or is it something that's built out with a product spec?
But I've usually seen it as a sprint 0 activity where you don't have every user story refined before you start. You can't. It's not feasible. You need, in my experience, at least 2 or 3 sprints worth of reasonably well-refined user stories to be able to say, okay, these are the ones we're going to look at right now. And sometimes the technical sprint requirement of iteration 0 or sprint 0 is what decides what needs to be done and refined first. We've got to figure out these big strategic questions, because if we figure them out later, we could be in a lot of trouble. So we're going to force them into our first 3 sprints, and that might shape what goes on initially. But what happens after that may not be worked out yet, but you never want to be refining your sprints literally the day before you have your sprint meeting. You want to always try and be at least 1 full sprint workload ahead or more on your refined user stories.
Just a bit of a tongue-in-cheek one. Are you arguing that no one's allowed to take any leave, etc., while an agile project is running or a sprint's running?
No, but what I'm saying is that if people are on leave, right, you have a rhythm and you have an understanding. You might say, okay, you've got a 2-week sprint. Fred's going to be away the 2nd week of this sprint and the 1st week of the next sprint because he's having 2 weeks off, right? What does that mean? Well, the Scrum Master's job is to say, right, Fred, I'm going to ask you to just take on 1 week's worth of stuff, and then you're going to have a one-to-one with the customer out of sequence, only you. Or we're going to represent you at the meeting, and then when you come back, you will have a one-on-one with me to pull a week's worth of work in out of the sprint run. Or we're going to say, you got 2 weeks, and you're going to figure out now at the beginning of this sprint what your 2 weeks work's going to do. And half of it's going to get done this sprint and half of it's going to get done next sprint. And you're not going to talk to the customer until the end of that 2nd sprint. You're literally blurring 2 sprints into one, Fred. That's how it's going to work for you. Any option is fine, as long as the Scrum Master, the product owner, and Fred all have that figured out and are comfortable with it. So there's a number of ways to resolve that, but you have to have a way that works for everybody. And Fred takes his holiday when Fred needs to take his holiday. That is obviously important.
Absolutely. So I was being a bit facetious about it. And by the way, just a bit of a warning, we'll be closing the questions in about 3 minutes because we have probably more here already than we can really get through. In the hope of getting to the end of questions about stand-ups, I'm going to spit out 3 or 4 all in one. William says that in their daily stand-ups, people either have nothing to say or repeat the same thing as yesterday. Is it better not to have them in that scenario? I think you've already answered that. Probably the answer is potentially no, but it relates to these questions as well. How do you transform a stand-up from a status update to being an interactive meeting based on performance? For example, another questioner says, our format is everybody says what they did yesterday, what they intend to do today, and are there any blockers? Is that the way to do it, or are there better ways?
That is the classical way to do it. That's the official way of doing it, if you could call that such a thing. But what I've seen happen a lot is that you have the status update of what did you do yesterday, what are you doing today, gets really condensed. I'm working on user story this yesterday, I'm working on it again today. More important about what are you going to do today, and you might be saying, I'm going to be creating database fields today. And someone else says, well, I'm doing create database fields as well today, right? And that might be an issue, or maybe not. And so there's still a reason to do that, but it's meant to be that simple. And your point is, you say something and has anyone got a comment? And it's meant to be extremely short. It's meant to be so painless that if everyone's got easy things to say, it's done in maybe 10 minutes. But the point for having it is that on those occasions where something jumps out, nobody's bitten by it because we had it come out, we had it revealed, we had it found. And it's an insurance policy. And if people aren't willing to invest in insurance policy, it could be because they're more willing to just handle the emergency when it happens and figure that out. And, 2 people trying to edit the same field. Okay, we'll just solve that at the time. And that can be an acceptable approach as well. And it can be an efficient approach, but it's a Scrum Master's call. And you have to be able to balance the degree of risk and the degree of consequences. And if you find that there's not enough sharing going on and it causes issues in productivity, that's on the Scrum Master to say, we're not doing this as well as we could. I need a bit more sharing, and this is why. But if the Scrum Master can't argue that and has no reason to say, okay, this is the consequence of not sharing, then they're probably not going to get a lot of interest in people sharing beyond what they already do. The risk is that becomes a habit day in, day out. And then one day something big happens and blows up because we haven't had a stand-up meeting all week. So there has to be a balance.
Great. These 2 questions are a little bit related as well. And I'm trying to try and find some different areas. It's obvious that many of our attendees tonight are very deep into Agile and Scrum and have lots of detailed questions as well. Somebody coincidentally called Shane says, if I have to explain a high level of network diagrams, etc., to a project manager who has no understanding, what's the best way of doing that if they're a non-technical person? And sort of corollary to that is it advantageous for the dev team to have a Scrum Master who actually is technically competent or technically adept?
The second half of that question, I would say absolutely yes. And quite often the Scrum Master is a person with a technical background who's upskilled into Scrum, far more often than a career project manager who is stepped in. It's far more often because there is that value. That is not to say that a project manager can't learn enough, but that's an ambitious thing that they need to take on and take seriously, because they're going to be balancing the technical concerns along with the commercial realities. So you need to have enough of both. But the first part of the question, part of the issue is that there really isn't the same role of project manager here. So who do they need to convince of what the network diagram looks like? But I would say that part of the point behind the product owner and the Scrum Master being equals and being in tension is that they're meant to have mutual respect. And yes, the Scrum Master is meant to represent the technical side of it and have or pull in the technical knowledge that they need. And the product owner is meant to trust that technical expertise and answer. At the same time, the respect needs to be given to the product owner that when they say, well, this is what the customer wants, the trust is that that's what the customer wants, and that's what the product owner is meant to know. And so that mutual respect is one of the reasons why these roles are meant to be parallel, and you don't have one higher than the other. But there's always a issue of mutual respect with the technology and how it works. And usually people have decision-making power over things that they don't understand how it works. That's usually a misallocation. If the roles have got the wrong allocation of power and responsibility and the wrong allocation of knowledge and understanding, that's where the problem lies.
Excellent. Would you expect risks and issues to also be captured on the product backlog rather than a separate risk register?
Sometimes, yeah. You might have a technical or a user story that is specifically there because of a risk, or specifically relates to a risk. It might be, figure this out so that we know what that risk is. Or it might be, you absolutely would have things in the product backlog that says, here's a user story, and this one is high risk. It could be high uncertainty or high consequences. So you need to know those because they're going to get pulled into some of your early sprints so that you can nail down that uncertainty and figure that out before it becomes something quite painful or expensive later. So yes, there definitely is scope in or room in the product backlog to talk about risk factors.
Mr. Anonymous attendee, who also suggested that coders say, we'll start coding and then you get some specs together, which I thought was very apropos. He has asked, or they have asked, I should say, how do you run an Agile project for a fixed price quote? If you've already bid on the deal.
That makes the product owner's job very difficult because, so the simplest equation is to say that a fixed price buys you a certain amount of user story points. It doesn't buy you features. It doesn't buy you user stories. It doesn't buy you capability. It buys you story points. That's the way Agile works. And if you burn through your story points, as in your workload budget, if you burn through that because of the human capital and the hours is being burned up doing things that the customer has asked for that aren't actually delivering what the customer wants, that's on the customer. And they've only paid a fixed price for a fixed amount of work. And it's up to them with the product owner to very carefully manage the product backlog to try and turn that into capability that they're willing to pay for within that budget before it runs out. That's the art. That's the really hard part. But it's not an expectation on the delivery team to somehow suddenly work more, work harder, work more clever, have all the answers. That's not how Agile works. Unknowns are unknowns. Empirical means empirical. You can't just say, I've got a fixed budget, and so therefore all the answers have to be now. It's a trade-off. It's the opportunity cost. If you have to spend money on exploring and you're running low on money, then it comes down to what features are you willing to live without.
Absolutely. It's always opportunity cost. Yeah. And should one Scrum Master, product owner and development team be working only on one product at a time?
So that's a scale and resourcing issue. Ideally, yes, but often that's not how things work. You have to break it up somehow. Remember what we talked about, the way sprints are designed because of cognitive momentum. You really need to maximize your cognitive momentum. And for some team members, they could be working on this project, this user story for this project, and then next week work on this one and this one. It could be different projects, pardon me, and that might be no different to two different user stories that happen to be in the same project that are just equally unrelated. That can happen. But what you need to protect is the cognitive momentum, that when someone's working on a user story, let them finish. Let them maintain all the things that they've got in their head and leverage that, and don't ask them to dump that for something else and then come back and pull that back into their head again later, not for the wrong reasons or for juggling. because you will lose so much efficiency out of that it's going to provide more harm in most cases than you would get out of having two projects going on at once. It's not the sum of the parts. You might, instead of taking twice as long, it might take 2.5 or 3 times as long.
I suppose it all goes down to having the client vision right. And to that point, I've been asked, is there a formal way or meeting that a product owner should follow to ensure that they fully understand the client vision or the product? Is it only the product owner who's responsible for documenting it?
It's not only the product owners responsible for documenting it, because it's their responsibility to make sure that the documentation answers all the questions that the team needs answered. Now, the customer themselves should have a huge role in preparing that. And they may need to be guided through that by the product owner, and they may need to be chased and hounded at times, or educated in how to do that by the product owner. And the product owner's accountability is to the team for the quality, density, and understanding of that information, and then back to the customer for the results that yields. But they're not going to do all the work. The customer should do the majority of the work, and the product owner is they have a similar role. The Scrum Master has a role within the Scrum team. The product owner has a similar mastery role with the customer, getting them in shape and helping them be a good customer and do good customer things.
Right. I think we'll do maybe 2 more questions, and then we'll look at the poll results. I've closed the poll now, and we've also closed the questions a couple of minutes ago. Can you explain what a spike is, what it entails, and what it looks like?
A spike. So I've heard a lot of ways in which a spike has been explained or defined. I think it's a colloquial term, or began as a colloquial term. I don't know if I can provide a authoritative definition of it, but what I would describe a spike is when you have unexpected changes. Like in a burn down situation, you get spikes where you get changes to the scope through, as I mentioned before, errors in estimating or in changes to what the customer is requiring. So increases in the amount of story points needed or decreases. So I would the word spike, I've never seen it or heard it used as a specific term in Scrum that I can recall.
It's been asked as an investigation task. Oh, here we go. We use spikes for proof of concept kind of requirements prior to teasing out the user requirements.
Right. Okay. That's a different context altogether. So I'm not clear on that. That's not a phrase or a label I've used. I'm going to leave that to the audience.
I reckon that's a great one to go into the forum.
I'm going to ask the audience or the forum or anyone in chat that has their own answer, because you may get a couple of answers, and I think that'll help everyone, and I'll learn a few things from that too.
Great. And that is a reminder that all of the unanswered questions, if your question you feel hasn't been answered, because we've got through 40 something already, and there's still a pile left here, please put them in the forums, and there'll be other people there, and Brenton will look in as well. We'll get some of them answered. Just a couple of, these are more comments as well as questions, I suppose. In Scrum Master-led daily stand-ups, do they limit team autonomy? And what happens if the Scrum Master's not there? Is it really more about coaching the whole team to go by themselves? And then a corollary to that as well is, how do we encourage developers who are not forthcoming during planning, retrospectives, meetings, etc., and do not volunteer to become more active participants?
So the Scrum Mastery in the daily upstanding is a chairperson role, and anyone can do it. And it is a great way of getting budding Scrum Masters to get a taste of it and get involved in that sort of activity. And they would fill in if the Scrum Master is not available, etc. So it's quite fine for someone else to stand at the front and facilitate or to make it all happen, literally like any person chairing a meeting would. And so it's the responsibility of the Scrum Master to make sure it happens. And if they're not there, they should delegate it. And they should be saying, right, you handle this on this occasion. So it's an accountability for them, but anyone can potentially do that. When you find people that aren't getting involved, the whole reason why you have Scrum Master as a separate role is because the Scrum Master should be having their own one-to-one conversations with team members as and when needed. And when people aren't sharing and a Scrum Master sees that this person hasn't said much for the last few meetings, they would wonder, I meet with them and talk to them and say, give me an update. Tell me what's going on. How are you going? What have you done? What's happening here? What's happening there, right? You didn't share that with the team. Was there a reason? Oh, whatever the case may be. They're a coach and they're meant to know and help figure out all of the hidden problems as well. That's why it's normally a full-time role. And so, yeah, the Scrum Master is meant to be having as many one-to-one chats with the team members as necessary for them to be able to know and identify. And then the Scrum Master says, look, tomorrow at the stand-up, can you mention that? I'll point to you and talk about this thing. And maybe a few times that happens, they'll get confidence, they'll get used to sharing and speaking up, etc. But they might need help. And that is exactly, the Scrum Master has all the power of the chair of the meeting, and they're meant to share it. That's a fundamental of facilitating. And so the Scrum Master gives their power to everyone else, and they might have to do that a little more deliberately at times.
Fantastic. Well, I think we've probably really run out of time. So let's move on. And again, apologies to the people who have asked many questions. Some people have asked quite a few, and we've only been able to answer a couple of each of those as we've gone through.
I'm sharing the poll as well.
Great.
What's the winner there? Release planning. It's only just a winner. Will release planning and use? Yeah, like release planning in my experience has always been the hardest thing to do. It's what separates good from great Scrum teams. And user stories are always the problem. They're the thing we have to wrangle. They're the monkeys in the arena that we've got to try and sort out. They're always a thorn in our side in some way. So I'm not surprised that those two are top of the list here.
Fantastic. Well, I think it's on that note, it's probably time to say goodnight.
All right, just a quick reminder, everyone. Next week, we're going to be talking about Agile delivery. So we're going to talk about ongoing delivery. We're going to talk about continuous integration, continuous delivery. We're going to talk about value streams, and we're going to talk about services in an Agile environment. That's what's covering next week.
Absolutely. And thank you so much to Lil for looking after the chat and providing lots of information along the way this evening. Thanks for everyone to come along. We will see you same time, same situation next week, 7:30. It's been really great to have you all along, and please bung all those questions into the forums. Don't forget that there are quizzes for each week as well of 5 questions, and you can only do the final exam if you've gone through all the quizzes and passed them. You can have multiple attempts at the quizzes, but the exam itself is a single attempt only. So yeah, we look forward to seeing you next week, and thank you again, Brenton, for a fantastic session on Scrum.
My pleasure. Thank you to everyone for all of your great questions, for all the comments, for all the participation. And if you're wondering, did we just try to cram a couple of days worth of training into a 1-hour webinar? Yes, we did. That's just how we roll around here. And we're going to try and do something similar again next week. So please come along and join us for that. Until then, that's all from me for now. Good night.
Good night.